Greetings, marvelous folks. Today we bring, at the request of our hallowed dwellers in the marvelous community, an analysis of Frankenstein's monster. This has been long overdue, and we couldn't be more excited, as Frankenstein is where it all begins. The idea of scientific imagination blending into horrors expunged from visions of psychological derailments coupled with atmospheric mysticism was explored firsthand by Frankenstein. For centuries now, Frankenstein's monster has evolved into an iconography that has been the hallmark for exploring and defining monstrosity and non-human others. However, in today's video, we will be delving into the dubious origins of the monster's mind-boggling feats and anatomical attributes that we have raved over and will never have enough of. So let's make haste and dive right into it. But before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin. Who is Frankenstein's monster in literature? The monster, or the creature of Victor Frankenstein, is perhaps the closest we have to one of the earliest, most potent biological weapons that we encounter in popular culture and literature. The legends of Frankenstein that we harmonize and celebrate in films and media are, in many ways, a misappropriation. What we see today is a loathsome ogre, walking down a path of gory horror, painting towns red without so much as a thought. As a matter of fact, the iconography of Frankenstein's monster has been reduced to a beastly prowler who's otherwise inept, almost incapable of articulating, except on occasion, vocalizing groans to enhance the theatrical appeal we tend to associate with a classic Halloween scare. However, if we were to trace its origins, we would find that the monster wasn't, in fact, monstrous in the way we comprehend monsters. But don't be too alarmed. I don't mean to be a killjoy here. There's still loads to uncover. Mary Shelley's Frankenstein the Modern Prometheus is a gothic fiction that serves as a meditation on the paradoxical nature of creation and humanity. Alright, before we digress further, Frankenstein's monster was part of an experiment to build a human who would be invulnerable to plagues and diseases, boasting a mammoth physique capable of superhuman strength and the intelligence of the soundest of minds. It was on a rainy November night in the year 1818 that Frankenstein's monster was galvanized into life, brought into being as a startling 8-foot-tall figure from exhumed corpses. He's described as having wrinkled, parchment-like skin hanging loosely over his blood vessels, with blackened lips and long black hair fluttering in the wind, and eyes a morbid yellow. Victor Frankenstein, a medical student who is finally on the cusp of something path-breaking after days of yearning, toil, and trouble, would be horrified at his creation. As the monster awoke from his slumber, Frankenstein, terrified, shunned him with absolute disdain and fled the house. The appearance of Frankenstein's monster. The lore and legend of Frankenstein's monster have evolved into a caricature of artistic exploitations and reimaginings, especially among ardent patrons of the Gothic genre. And why wouldn't it be? In terms of popularity and reception, it's second only to Count Dracula, the Prince of Darkness. When we think of Frankenstein or Frankenstein's monster, by the way, they are not one and the same, though we often refer to them interchangeably. There's yet another fascinating anecdote behind the misnomer legacy. I'll get to that in a bit. Anyway, what do we really imagine Frankenstein's monster to be? What you're probably thinking is likely not lore accurate, as it were. A gigantic green corpse stitched together with its head flattened out, closely resembling a pot lid, with bolts sticking out on either side of its neck. Its gait, very similar to that of a zombie-esque creature, has colossal arms flailing and outstretched, clutching at its prey. Yes, that is indeed the most popular depiction adapted into animated shows, comics, posters, toys, and games. The interaction of a lampooning green monster with yellowish hues has seeped into our collective consciousness over decades. But of course, it is only one among many. Over centuries, the creature has taken on many forms and appearances. In what is considered the maiden theatrical adaptation of the novel, the parameters and the likeness we associate the creature with were staged and set into motion. This became a model for several idiosyncrasies and tropes that that have become staples even to this day in most adaptations, the most reminiscent of which is the creature's iconic groan and lurching forth. In later adaptations for the theater, the creature was fashioned after a hobgoblin, having blue skin, possessing infernal strength that mere humans cannot comprehend even in their damnedest dreams. Finally, it was in 1944, in a full-length feature adaptation of the novel House of Frankenstein, that the creature first received its flat head. Jack Pierce, the unsung hero behind the monster's jagged head, was rather meticulously thorough about it. In his words, the flat head was suggested because it made the creature look like a product of electrical energy. The flatness gave the impression that his brain had been worked on, like a crude experiment. He elaborated further by saying that upon discovering while researching a bit about anatomy and implants, there are about 6 ways a doctor can carve into the skull, and since Frankenstein was not a practicing surgeon, he probably would take the easiest route, which was to slit open and cut through the top of the skull straight across, like a pot lid, to pop the brain in and clamp it tight. What a legend. Absolutely ingenious and quite perceptive when you think about it. But wait, it gets even better. Pierce placed electrodes in his neck to transfer electricity in his body and decided to smear green paint all over the creature, as he intended for the creature to incite an otherworldly terror when revealed. Et voila! That's how we got ourselves the colossal green beast that we've all nagged our parents for Halloween Day celebrations. However, in the original text, as Mary Shelley intended, the monster was far more grotesque and sinister in appearance than the one we are familiar with. Frankenstein set out to sculpt a synthesis of humanity's finest attributes, the most elegant of mankind made in the likeness of the first man, which is perhaps why the monster is sometimes referred to as Adam. Shelley deliberately, by design, doesn't go at length about the machinations and the processes involved in the creation of the monster, so there are no mentions of stitching together body parts, except that the creature was brought into life by galvanism. We know that the creature has watery, dull eyes, followed by blackened lips and a shriveled complexion that heightens the unnatural design. The imperfect form of the monster was mainly due to Frankenstein's inability to accurately replicate the intricate details of the human body. Inadvertently, what took form was abnormally assorted body parts standing asymmetrically at an expansive girth and a staggering 8 feet in height. This is why the monster needs to be under the cover of a black hood and a jacket to conceal his frightening features. Origin and creation of Frankenstein's monster. In the late 18th century, a student named Victor Frankenstein, a pupil at the University of Ingolstadt, Germany, longed to create the perfect man, unsullied and divine, as God had intended in his creation of the first human, Adam. Victor was born into affluence. His family commanded great respect among the public in Geneva. After scouring through tireless nights of frenzy and fatigue, he discovered the source of life and generation. He had finally succeeded in generating life by reanimating lifeless matter through galvanism. He was now closer than ever to his dream of building his very own human. Now, at the time, Luigi Galvani, after whom we get the term galvanism, had earned widespread recognition and fame in the scientific fraternity of Europe for discussing bioelectricity by passing electricity through a frog, causing its lifeless limbs to kick. And so began his profane ventures as he consecrated hallowed grounds of rest to collect bones and collected materials from the charnel that constituted both animal and human parts to weave his magnus opus and stoke the flames of his destiny. Finally, the day arrived. On a cold November night, as it drizzled into a heavy downpour, the creature convulsed into life, with eyes wide open, glaring, and we're already aware of what happens next. Perhaps one of the most haunting aspects in Shelley's Frankenstein is the creation of the monster. Filmmakers and playwrights have taken great liberty in intrigue for the creation scene to stand out in particular. Some have painted the monster blue, and others green. While there's virtually no scientific causal agent or an event to attribute the creature's pigmentation to, that was never a bother for the audience or critics, as what perhaps tickled their brain was the fascinating aura of a beast that is, in essence, a concoction of exhumed remains of humans and animals. The alienating component of living undead must be modeled after a hideous creature that must not retain retain any humanness, so to speak, but of humanity's soiled dreams, goriest nightmares, and horrifying revelations. While the monster was neither blue nor green in Shelley's imagination, it was no less terrifying to read. In her words, his yellow skin scarcely covered the work of muscles and arteries beneath. His hair was of a lustrous black and flowing, his teeth of a pearly whiteness, but these luxuriances only formed a more horrid contrast with his watery eyes that seemed almost of the same color as the dun white sockets in which they were set, his shriveled complexion, and straight black lips. Frankenstein Chapter 5. What was meant to be a human par excellence had resulted in an abomination. Victor abandons the creature in the moment of his animation, fleeing the house and forcing his creation to wander into the woods and fend for himself. Exploring Frankenstein's monster's personality. In the novel, the monster is not just a mindless berserker gnawing at flesh, thirsting after blood, and affixed to satiate devilish impulses. The monster is reflective, highly intelligent, and exhibits compassion and artistic sensibilities for all life forms around him. He is anything but inhuman. Perhaps he's more human than any of us can ever aspire to be. Despite the monster's ragged appearance and beastly build, he was a benign soul, caring deeply, often going out of his way to care for those in need, the weak and the vulnerable. Leaving aside his sinister look, the monster truly was, in every sense, the Adam of creation. In fact, in Shelley's original creation, the monster was a highly intelligent vegetarian who foraged berries and fruits and detested the idea of harming living creatures around him. He wanted nothing more than to love and be loved in return at the beginning of the novel. His curiosity and intellect is far beyond our reach. At what many would consider a learning stage for ordinary humans, as he learnt to speak, he simultaneously read and deciphered some of the most difficult writers of literatures like Plutarch and Milton. Ironically, it's in the monstrous treatment that he received for not fitting to society's norms and ideals of aesthetic constraints and appeal that he chose to indulge in killing. Not as a fancy, like a warped lunatic, but out of compulsion. While it doesn't justify his killings, one can certainly empathize with the monster's ailing heart and his crumbling psyche, ravaged mercilessly on almost every occasion. Does Victor's creation have superhuman abilities? Victor's creation is manifold times stronger than that of an average human. His build renders him augmented strength, endurance, and speed. His uber strength and prowess allowed him to climb atop the hills of Mont-Salève in a remarkably short span of time, which is incredible to say the least, considering the mountain stands at nearly 5,000 feet above sea level. This is telling enough of how supremely gifted the monster is as opposed to a commoner. He has stated in the novel that he can easily crush a cottage or tear apart humans, leaving their entrails bare with ease. His towering frame allowed him to leap across distances, swifter than a stag, pouncing like a crouching prowler. Now, a stag can run nearly at a speed of 70 kilometers per hour, which sets him at a distinction miles apart from an ordinary human. Moreover, due to his unique anatomical advantages, he's quite pliable, offering him heightened flexibility. Owing to possessing greater density in bones and muscles to support his gigantic frame, he can also withstand a great deal of damage that would be fatal for a normal human under similar circumstances. The monster's relationship with Victor Frankenstein. The relationship between the monster and Frankenstein is a profound exploration of the moral responsibility of a creator. Shelley's novel delves into the ethical implications of scientific progress and the boundaries of morality. How far should we push the limits of technology and progress? These are the thought-provoking questions that Shelley raises in the complex relationship between Victor Frankenstein and his creation. There are many different ways the relationship can be understood. For instance, the very first adaptation of the novel in cinema treats it as a psychoanalytical adage of the self and the other. To put it simply, we are all Frankensteins, and we each possess the ferocious tenacity and beastly cravings that we repress to fit into the binds of society. However, there is a deeper theme at work here. Shelley wanted to poke at something larger, something incomprehensibly scary that can challenge our authority at the center of the universe. In the same vein, Ex Machina echoes a similar concern. The movie explores the intimate and complicated relationship between the creator and the created, often urging us to consider if robotic sentience can constitute life. And if it does, who's to say it won't turn on us, tear at us, establish its dominion and race? Victor Frankenstein, too, was confronted with similar apprehensions when, in a moment of epiphany, he realized that building his creation a bride would be equivalent to having manufactured the doom of his race. However, it's not not just about legitimacy and the dynamic of power. Frankenstein's creation was his labor of love, a true passion project, and in that we see the spirit of a nurturer too. However, he was disillusioned upon witnessing his creation come to life, so the monster is stripped of parental support in his first moments, perhaps the most vulnerable he could ever be. Adding to this, the constant societal rejection, forcing him to live as a pariah, leaves a deep-seated wound that he never fully recovers from. He vows to bring terror and carnage to his creator and the world around him. Perhaps the most defining moment of their relationship is fully realized when, in the end, as Frankenstein suffers and dies, the monster has a meltdown, as a son would have upon witnessing the death of a parent. Does the creature have self-sustenance, superhuman agility, and limitless stamina? Frankenstein's monster is not just a patchwork of body parts, as we've seen. He's capable of insane feats of strength and daring. But can he survive without food or shelter? The answer is yes. While there's never a mention of him needing to feast like a ravenous beast, he can survive in the wild for days, turning into weeks, without needing much. In fact, he practically doesn't need anything to survive. His needs are more psychological than physiological. Technically, he's a high-functioning corpse, almost on a perpetual rush of adrenaline. He has no need for care or medical attention. His stamina, though not limitless, is still incredibly impressive. In the novel, he swims across the English Channel at a pace nearly impossible for any human, all in pursuit of Victor. In some films, we see him pull off incredible Parker-like flips and leaps over large walls and buildings. So Frankenstein's monster doesn't tread lightly. He's a force of nature, unstoppable in his quest. Is he immortal? Does he have a healing factor? Well, we can't attest to his immortality as much as we can to his healing. The monster is often witnessed performing feats requiring strength and stamina, but can he recover if there's a fire raging? Well, in the movie adaptations, he can walk through fire unscathed. He's also survived falls off a cliff and bullet wounds, which would ordinarily kill any human in cold blood. That's not to say he doesn't suffer or is invulnerable, as we have seen him incapacitated and dealing with damage as well. So it's safe to say that the creature is not immune to injuries or damage, but certainly does boast extraordinary healing. He is not fatigued as often as we are, nor can he be fazed by bullets, at least not for long. So I suggest something bigger. A bazooka, an artillery shell, or perhaps a volley of bullets fired point blank would probably do the job. Does he have superhuman intelligence? Frankenstein's creation was intended to rival the creation of God himself. Victor wanted to craft a living entity whose intelligence far surpassed what the human mind is capable of conceiving. He sought to test the very limits of life to redefine the dual notions of life and death, and in many ways he succeeded. While his creation may not exude the artistic perfection of Michelangelo's David, the creature's sonorous intellect allows him to violate societal taboos with cunning strategies and carefully devised plans. Despite his motivation being revenge, the monster is rarely sloppy in his tactics. We must also consider the fact that this creature learned to speak and write eloquently, all by himself, without the aid of a mentor or accomplice. He did this simply by observing a family from afar. The creature is an excellent survivor, and given his time spent in the wild, he likely has a better understanding of nature than we do. He's thoughtful, self-aware, and understands his place in the world. What makes him particularly terrifying is his awareness of his own pathology. He even acknowledges it when he says, "I have love in me the likes of which you can scarcely imagine, and rage the likes of which you would not believe. If I cannot satisfy the one, I will indulge the other." Revenge and tragedy in the monster's story. At its core, Frankenstein's monster is a meditation on revenge and tragedy. Essentially, Frankenstein is a tale as old as time. The anxiety of creation is beset by stifling odds, taking a turn for something irrevocably worse as it comes to fruition. I mean, it's already in the name, and the monster is the modern equivalent of Prometheus, a titan incarnate. But what's particularly stirring or evocative is not the monster himself. Contrary to what we usually see on screen, Shelley's monster is articulate and profound in his worldview. His utterances are never wasteful. If we were to study his condition, we would realize the dimensions of his pathology are as multifaceted as any human. The monster was shunned as an outcast from the very onset of his creation by society time and again, despite his insistence on fitting into the norm, to be recognized as an equal, to seek comfort and warmth in love, camaraderie, and companionship. Ironically, the only person who was kind to him was a blind man. Like most of us, he too longed for the comfort of a loving family. He learnt to speak by eavesdropping on conversations and reading the works of John Milton, Plutarch, and Johann Wilhelm Goethe. However, as fate would have it, all came to naught when the family in Geneva fled after encountering his vile and horrific demeanor. This threw the monster in a fit of rage, and he swore vengeance on his creator. Seething with rage, he pursued Victor Frankenstein and sought him out in the Alps. He confronted Victor, blamed him for his misfortune, and lay it to him that Victor take it upon himself to set things right by building him a bride, after which he would withdraw into oblivion, parting ways with humanity forever. However, Victor failed to hold his end of the parley. The monster promised a gut-churning tryst on Victor's wedding night, where he would make an appearance. Frankenstein reluctantly agreed, but was at once taken aback by the fear of propagating the rise of a race of eerie undead endangering the existence of humans on Earth. He let go of the project at the last minute. This sent the monster over the edge, who, as promised, wreaked havoc on Victor's wedding night. He first killed Henry Clerval, Victor's most trusted comrade and confidant, and killed Elizabeth in a bloody massacre. Victor's father, the only surviving Frankenstein after Victor, fell into a deep state of melancholia, which he never recovered from and eventually subdued to overwhelming grief after discovering Elizabeth's corpse lifeless and heinously brutalized. Now, with no one to lose, a bereaved Victor, set on revenge, set sail and went after the monster who had fled to the Arctic. Victor fell into the frigid waters of the Arctic and died, narrating his story to the ship's captain. The monster showed up not long after to observe revelry and gloat over the sight of his master's corpse. However, he was soon struck with the realization that, with his master deceased before him, he too had exhausted his purpose. A sense of grief followed and engulfed him as he dawned upon the fateful conclusion that he truly was alone and had nothing to live for and serve. He announced that he would dispatch himself on the funeral pyre to mark his dismissal from the world. He jumped out of the ship and disappeared into the horizon. The tragedy of Frankenstein was poignantly monstrous and pervasive, reeling us into the dark vaults of a subliminal Pandora's box from which we should steer clear. Well, besides being a cautionary tale, it offered us an excellent insight into how fragile and frantic we are as humans. You may be a towering giant capable of tearing humans from limb to limb, but what good is any of that if we can't find refuge and salvation in creation's greatest prize of all? The divine chalice is nothing but love's embalming embrace that lulls us into sleep, revitalizing us to walk through the hell of our existence. Adaptations of Frankenstein's monster in popular culture. Since the early 19th century, after the publication of Frankenstein's monster, artists, filmmakers, and writers have swooned over the rich complexity of themes to experiment with. Frankenstein's has been the true face of horror and ranks high as a recurring trope in films and drama, starting from the early 1900s till now, spanning more than a century and still going strong. You really don't have to be a geek about it to have been exposed to the creature's frightful antics and unnerving gait in animated shows like Scooby-Doo that most of us grew up watching. However, the monster made its maiden appearance for the big screen during the silent era. For the most part, the creature was portrayed as this imperfect clone who would stop at nothing to satiate his evil schemes. The film was an excellent departure from the source material as it reimagines the creature in a completely different light. For instance, the monster was not stitched out of body parts, but was bred and raised in a reactor vessel or a chemical vessel. However, what's particularly fascinating is that, in a mind-boggling twist, the big revelation comes in and we get to know that the creature was but a manifestation of Frankenstein's subconscious. Portrayed by the late Charles Stanton Ogle, the creature is nothing like it is in the works of Shelley. What we see is a vile hybrid of human and orangutan that is a sadistic miscreant over taunting and vilifying his creator, devoid of a tragic background. In 1931, the iconic Frankenstein, portrayed by Boris Karloff, took the world of cinema by storm. It's a movie that pioneered and cemented the perception of much of the quirks and attributes that we popularly associate the monster with. And it's also the movie that propelled the misnomer wherein we often refer to the creature by the name of its creator. Decades later, we finally saw Frankenstein being adapted in a television series, Penny Dreadful, albeit not the sole focus, but it's the only cinematic portrayal that stays the most faithful to Shelley's original description. While tragic, the show's monster monster is much less monstrous and more flamboyant. He adopts the name Caliban after the deformed villain of Shakespeare's The Tempest. It's the only show wherein we are offered a respite from the trope of a monster mindlessly groaning to subdue anyone caught in his wretched sight. Penny Dreadful elevates the monster's artistic appeal and zest that far exceeds even Shelley's portrayal. The monster is intricately more nuanced and vicious, but never lacking in intellectual vigor and spirit. Besides these, the lore of Frankenstein has been adapted in a host of graphic novels and comics, the most notable among which is the 2017 comic series Destroyer by Victor Laval. It situates Shelley's narrative in the contemporary socio-political groundwork to address themes of racial discrimination, gender identity, state-sponsored terrorism, and issues of immigration. Every retelling, varied as they may be, stirs us out of apathy, urging ourselves to look inwards to ponder over the wrongs in our perceptions and beliefs. Legacy of Frankenstein's monster in horror fiction. The legacy of Frankenstein's monster in horror fiction is forever etched in our minds, clear as day. The legacy of Frankenstein exceeds far beyond its scope and reception as a horror classic that fans have come to admire and shower their praises on. Had it not been for Frankenstein, we probably never would have seen a wave of gothic fiction and horror genres as we know them today. What Mary Shelley has achieved with Frankenstein's monster is a cautionary tale signifying that we humans, as a species, are inherently doomed. As we step foot into forbidden trails of desire and ambition, we unwittingly unleash a chaos that engulfs us whole. Over the years, as science and tech have progressed, the archetype of Frankenstein has become more relevant and potent than ever before. We love playing gods. We always have. Since the dawn of the Renaissance, we have striven to commit ourselves to redefine the threshold of what limits us as humans. We are Vitruvian men, and that notion alone has led us to the juncture we are at today, to sublime heights that we continue to soar and scale. However, that very idea bears the seed of our doom. Frankenstein's creation paved the way for a generation of writers and filmmakers to ponder over and engage their faculties to come up with some of the coolest sci-fi and supernatural horrors that have become cult classics. As a matter of fact, the trope of Frankenstein is what sets the tone and mood for post-apocalyptic horror, an apprehension that was foreshadowed in Shelley's original work as well. Marvelous verdict. The legacy of Frankenstein's monster has been instrumental in shaping the emergence of scientific imagination as a genre beloved by all. Shelley crafted a novel of epic proportions, blending the dubious uncertainties of technology with unprecedented horrors. And she did this at a time when such ideas were almost unheard of. She bent the fabric of our imagination, urging us to rethink our aspirations and indulgences. Centuries have passed, yet the lore of Frankenstein endures, still fresh out of the oven. Even after countless adaptations and retellings, the monster's charm and mystery have never diminished. It's the anatomical proportions of dismal incongruity that make Frankenstein's monster an icon, one that the world continues to wonder at, both in horror and in awe. And if you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one and be safe. Thanks, everyone.